Hello, I'm going to do an August reading wrap up. It is technically almost the end of September, but that's okay. We are gonna do it anyway. I thought about just skipping August and going straight and doing September when September is over, but I thought August was full of a lot of reads, and I was like, you know what? I want to share. All of these, I don't have the physical copy. I will put their covers over here. I just want to preface this by saying that I don't read summaries, first of all, and I'm also not going to tell you a summary of the book. I'm just going to share what I rated and what I wrote in my review, as well as any other lingering thoughts that I may have. The first book I read and finished in August was an audiobook, and it was Only If You're Lucky by Stacey Willingham. So I rated this 4 stars. And first and foremost, I feel like this is going to be really weird, but if you are somebody who really likes the subject English, you may appreciate this as well. But the author's ability to write so many eloquent and beautiful similes was incredible. She had so many different ones, and they really added to the story. And as someone, again, whose favorite subject in school was English, I often went, oh, that was a good one. Ooh, that was good. There was just so many, and they were really good. Now, for the storyline, this book was really good. I enjoyed a handful of the characters and found myself getting really immersed in their lives. I do think there's maybe too many characters. This could be an audiobook problem, especially as somebody who just started listening to audiobooks this year. Maybe I'm just not very good yet, but I felt like it was just hard to keep up sometimes on like who was who. And I never pinpointed the villain and was constantly guessing what was next. I think she did a really good job wrapping this book up at the end. I appreciated that. I do wish this book was a bit faster paced. For example, I think the audiobook could have been 1 to 2 hours shorter for sure, and it would have been the perfect length. Next book I read, and I was so eager to read this book. It was Middle of the Night by Riley Sager. I love Riley's books. He does such a good job, I feel like. So I was, really anticipating this book. I did give it 4 stars, but the more I'm thinking on this right now, I think I might give it 3. I don't know. In my review, I said, I'm having a hard time wrangling my thoughts on this book. Number 1, this wasn't his best book. Riley has some much better, bigger thrills, bigger twisted books. So if I were to give a recommendation to somebody who wanted to start reading Riley Sager, this is not a book I would give. Number 2, I was starting to think this was going to be a paranormal book, and I was getting kind of pissed because that's just not what I was signing up for. Number 3, I was not expecting the ending at all. So hats off to that, Riley. I also feel like he tied everything together nicely with a nod to Paranormal Activity, which I was good with. I just didn't want the whole premise to be Paranormal Activity. Number 4, I wish this book was a bit more fast-paced. I think if it was, I would have liked it more. Overall, it was a solid read. I'm eager to see if anyone else kind of felt let down by that book a little bit, especially as people who A, read a lot of thrillers, and B, have read a lot of Riley Sager books. The next book I read was The Quiet Tenant, and this one I listened to as an audiobook. I just feel like so many people were raving about this book. It's The Quiet Tenant by Clemence. I don't know how to pronounce her last name. I don't know. I just felt like so many people were raving about this book, and I just expected a lot more from it. The first few chapters did have me going like, oh, this is going to be so good. I was really invested. Then when the ending credits started, I legit stared at my phone dumbfounded because I was like, the ending was just so blah. I wanted more. The only reasons I gave it gets 3 stars is because I listened to it. So I gave this book 3 stars. If it had been a physical format book for me, I would have probably rated it lower because I would have gotten maybe a little bit bored. But hearing it, like listening to the audiobook, made it a lot more engaging. I think I'm just so used to thrillers with huge twists that the ones that don't have those have me feeling a little unsatisfied. And again, I don't read summaries before I read a book. So maybe if I had, I would have liked this book better because I would have had different expectations. Because I would think this one is more of like a documentary style, true crime, not necessarily a thriller. But if you are somebody who's like just starting to read thrillers, this one might be a good book to start with. The next book in August, which so good, was The One by John Mars. I really enjoyed this book. This was a 5-star read for me, and it probably is one of my favorite books so far this year. Favorite thriller book so far this year, I would say. I quite literally felt like there was a twist on every single page, and that is really hard to do on a thriller without like then desensitizing everything. But this one was so good. At first I was very overwhelmed though by the amount of characters, but I quickly then learned like who is who, and I didn't have to keep going back to reference like, okay, who are we talking about right now? And then once I could keep track of them, it made the book even better. It was really crazy to me how John Mars was able to come up with so many plot twists in one book. This is my first John Mars book, so I'm so excited to read some more of his books if they're anything like this one, because man, he does thrills really good. Next book was The Sundown Motel by Simone St. James. And this was an audiobook for me. So this could be user error. This could be my fault. I was so into this book, and then at about like 50% of audiobook done, I got a little confused. I think that maybe I should have just restarted it so that I could have enjoyed it more fully, but it was going to be due at Libby like very soon, so I didn't have time to do that. So I don't think that really had to do with the author's fault. I think it was a me problem, and I maybe would have enjoyed this book better as a physical copy. I did enjoy the past, present, and multiple point of views. They really helped keep it interesting, and this would be a great book to read during spooky season because the paranormal activity was like really spooky. And then I also really didn't expect the ending, which is always great for a thriller reader. So overall, I like this book, but my inability to keep up during the audiobook may have impacted my enjoyment of it. I also think it could have been a little shorter. So for example, the audiobook was 11 hours. I think 9 hours would have been better. There were definitely some chapters that didn't need to be included or as long. But I will be reading more from this author because I think they do tell a good story. I think it was just user error specifically for this one. Giving that one 4 stars. We have 2 more books, and they are Frida McFadden. I'm on a Frida kick because they're so easy to listen to on an audiobook, but I will say that I am not a Frida girly. I don't think I'm a Frida girly, except for, you will see, in the last couple months, there were 2 Frida books that I did enjoy, so it's kind of did her rating a little bit. The next book I read was The Perfect Son by Frida McFadden, and I rated this 2 stars. I guessed the ending by 20% in, based off of Frida's other books. I feel like she tends to have the same twists and turns, and I can see how some people enjoy her books, especially if you're like a newbie thriller or you don't necessarily read thrillers that are super twisty. They just, to me, Frida's books a lot of the time don't hit. The twists aren't twisting by the 3rd book. By the time you've read a few of her books, it's like, okay, we've done this before type of a thing. I just wish she would spend a little bit more time writing her books. I feel like there's so much potential. And I just think she ends up writing them too quickly. If she would just spend a little bit more time writing them and thinking about the twists, I think they would be better. But I don't know. And don't come at me. Books are subjective, and if you love Frida, I love that for you. I do love some of Frida's books. I just don't love them all. And I think that they could be better. That's all. The last book I read in the month of August was The Locked Door by Frida McFadden. And this is where she kind of helped me like her again. Because this one I rated 4 stars. And I was very much expecting not to enjoy this book. But I was pleasantly surprised. I didn't see the ending coming. I was convinced I knew who the villain was, and I was ready to complain about the predictability of it in my review. But thankfully, I was proven wrong. I even enjoyed her extra twist at the end. She tends to do that. And I didn't see any plot holes in the story, which I have in her other books, so this was a solid read for me. I enjoyed the past and present timeline, the constant suspense of who done it, and the extra twist at the end. The only complaint I have is I did feel like it was longer than necessary, so it was an 8-hour audiobook, and I think 6 hours would have been perfect. The narrator wasn't my favorite for this audiobook, but that's not Frida's fault. And I can't say why, but her voice just irritated me. And it sounded pretty whiny, but again, that's not Frida's fault. But overall, I enjoyed this book. I'd love to know your thoughts on any of the books that I mentioned. If you've read them, what you rated it, what you thought. Again, Books are subjective, so if you absolutely loved one of these books and I didn't, that's totally okay. And I still want to know your thoughts, and I just love chatting books. That was my August reading wrap up, and I can't wait to hear more about yours.